Bang, bang. Bang, bang. Bang, bang. Bang, bang. Bang, bang. We're talking about gunpowder yesterday. It got me. Yeah, I'm literally shooting. There it goes. Okay, I'm done.
That's
Sorry.
the weirdest thing all day.
Yep.
That's the weirdest
Welcome,
thing I've
kids.
seen. And I saw Coach Clutter in a Zoom meeting.
That's true.
And Dana Carvey.
And Dana Carvey. Yeah.
Or I said they
Mr.
look like
Christensen did look like Dana Carvey.
Look like one of the newsies. Little paper boy.
I don't know. It was interesting, that's for sure. All right. Well, I tell you what, let me get the screen share going. We're gonna roll hard today, folks. We're going 56 through 75 today. And let me do a quick slide share, screen share. Here we are. Let me hit present on it.
Present.
Mr. Caskey, Mr. Ferrell, can you see those coming up?
Si, senor.
All right, I got you guys down here in the bottom of the screen, so we don't get into too much of it here. 56. This is the reign of the Aztec Empire, and it flipped on us there. It says pre-1450, and again, the reign of the Aztec Empire is definitely going to come from before 1450, but there is a little bit of a continuation of the Aztec Empire, as they were still a prominent empire when the arrival of the Spanish happened in Middle America, there in Mexico. And of course, the Spanish arrived there in the early 1500s. So again, when we look at these dates, I need to understand that a lot of these dates are circa dates, right? Circa 1450, and we have to make decisions as historians, and especially world historians, know what that necessarily means. So at any rate, what do you all think? What are some things that kids need to understand about the reign of the Aztec Empire?
Okay, all right. So the Aztec Empire. This is probably the largest empire in all of Western history pre-1450. Millions of people lived within this empire. The Aztecs, and by the way, is located in Mesoamerica, or basically what would be modern day Mexico today. It reached down into parts of like Guatemala and in like the Honduras and into that region. But this is largely what is Mexico today. In fact, within the Aztec Empire, they refer to themselves as Mexica people, right? So the country the nation state we know today as Mexico, is actually derived from the term Mexica people, which are people that lived within this empire. So, but yeah, so this is one of the largest empires in the Americas prior to Columbus's arrival. This was an empire that was most notably about human sacrifice. We don't have a lot of societies that sacrifice humans, but the Aztecs did. And this was a long-established practice in much of Mesoamerica. Before them, the Mayans did it. Before them, the Olmecs. So this is something, human sacrifice. The term bloodletting was very synonymous with the Aztecs. And of course, the idea of bloodletting was these are people that they depend on rain, and so they equated blood with rain. So they thought that the more blood that was let, more rain would come to them, which would help their crops and all of that. You have to remember something about the Americas. They don't have the resources that many parts of the Eastern Hemisphere have. They have a lack of rivers that many parts of the Eastern Hemisphere had. They have a lack of lakes. They have a lack of domesticated animals. Very few domesticated animals. So they had a much larger reliance on rain in their environment in that regard than a lot of Eastern Hemisphere peoples who had lots of domesticated animals. So they could use feces to fertilize their agriculture, whereas here in the West they really don't have this. So there's a huge reliance on rain, so therefore you have this huge reliance on bloodletting and all of that. Huge empire, and the Spanish arrive. They come across a very fractured empire. They realize a lot of people in this empire didn't want to be part of this empire. And the one thing the Spanish had going against them is numbers. So they looked to find alliances. They sought alliances. Of course, that's what's ultimately going to allow them to conquer the Aztecs. So, sorry. I love the Aztecs. I kind of went off there, but.
No, it's good. To just go a couple more things. So the Aztec Empire is actually three conglomerations kind of in one. And the main one is at what is present-day Mexico City, Tenochtitlan. And that city, some historians regarded could have been, for the time period, the largest city actually in the world. Very complex. They have very complex road system. So the Aztecs were known for, as Mr. Ferrell, their farming and agriculture. They were also had some very sophisticated irrigation systems. And one thing is that Tenochtitlan, or modern day Mexico City, is on a swamp. And so it was like sinking, and they actually had to drain entire swamps and kind of create like artificial islands. So to be able to do this without modern technology is pretty amazing. These were very, very advanced people, and sometimes historians look down upon them because of the human sacrifice being, a big no-no in Euro-Christian societies. They're seen as heathens or lesser than, but they were actually very, very complex societies, governments, organizations. They built temples and pyramids, the ziggurats throughout their empire as well. And we still see ramifications of their society still in Mexico culture today, specifically in the Yucatan Peninsula, but you can still see remnants of it in Mexico City and throughout central Mexico.
Yeah, great points by both you guys. I like to take things like this and look at them comparatively to get an understanding of the Aztec Empire. Comparing, say, the reign of the Aztec Empire, what a nice comparison you could make between them and, say, the reign of the Mongolian Empire or the reign of the Malian Empire. These are places or two other empires on the other side of the world that did a lot of similar things in terms of being able to rule over people, control numerous cities, control the vital resources, regulate the transmission and exchange and diffusion of goods, of resources, of technologies. All three of these sort of empires were able to extract tribute from subject peoples. They controlled trade routes. They benefited from trade routes. They could raise militaries very quickly when they needed to. They oversaw, relatively speaking, prosperous and productive times in their respective locations. Just because they're on the other side of the world doesn't make them any less significant than their Eastern Hemispheric counterparts. But what a great comparison students could make between the reign of the Aztec Empire and, say, the reign of the Malian Empire of West Africa, or even the reign of the great Mongolian Empire throughout most of Asia. If you look at those parallels, it'll kind of help you understand what the Aztec Empire was really capable of doing when you look at it through a comparative lens.
Oh, one thing real quick. I'm sure because we had a lot of this stuff at our feast day for Columbian Exchange, and you always quiz the kids on what came from where. And one of the contributions is the cacao bean chocolate. The Aztecs are credited with inventing chocolate, not our modern day chocolate where the French will take and add sugar and stuff in, but they create basically hot chocolate. And then they'll take it back to Africa and Europe and stuff. So no chocolate for the Europeans before the Columbian Exchange.
Also corn.
Yeah, well, in all those things, but the Aztecs specifically believed that chocolate was a gift from Quetzalcoatl, their god, their snake god, which actually is still on the Mexico flag today. If you look at the Mexican flag, the snake on there is the Aztec god
with the eagle.
Yeah.
Nothing. The cactus on the eagle, which that actually is symbolic. There was a myth, an Aztec myth, that stated that wherever an eagle would, perch next to or on a snake, on a cactus, that's where Tenochtitlan would settle. And I guess supposedly the myth goes, they saw that happen right in that spot. So that's how Mexico City essentially came to be, or Tenochtitlan came to be. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, it's a little art history information. Learn that and that.
Hey, and what we saw at the Orlando Art Museum, there was a lot of Mesoamerican, a lot of Mayan and Aztec art and figurines. I thought were pretty cool.
Those are
Which
amazing.
kids you can see if you sign up for AP Art History.
That's right. All right.
And I totally rhymed there, didn't mean to.
I'm intrigued by the chocolate god.
Yeah.
I feel
You
like
can
there should
see
be a
the
song
AP
about
Art
that,
History. What?
right? There should be a song about that. Chocolate god
Oh,
Is there not?
makes the chocolate here for you. Chocolate god.
he's doing Chocolate Rain. Chocolate Rain.
Yeah,
I'm not
that's
familiar
even
with that
better.
song.
Chocolate rain.
There you go.
Chocolate god.
Mr. Ferrell's not cool, Mr. Millette. Move on. We
He
lost.
doesn't know viral videos from 10 years ago?
Oh, I guess not. 15 years ago, probably.
Yeah. Chocolate god.
Sorry.
God.
Sorry, guys. I was busy on dates.
God.
Number 57. Yeah, dates from girls in Canada don't count.
Eh?
Yeah, exactly.
They're all
I
too
love the
polite.
Canadian ladies.
Those Canadian ladies are too polite to tell you no.
I've actually never
Here we
dated.
go.
57.
Not that I know of.
57, the reign of the great Zimbabwe. Let me move you guys up.
Yeah, me
Get
too.
you
I
out
gotta
of there.
move you guys. Your heads are too big.
I know. I'm moving this thing. All right. So the reign of the great Zimbabwe.
Oh, so I'll start with this. I actually just got done teaching this to my AP Art History kids in a video just yesterday. Great Zimbabwe. So this is an example of a well-organized city-state on the east coast of Africa. This is a city-state that will develop, especially with the development of the Indian Ocean trade. But these peoples, they had a circular city. It was kind of neat, and it was a stone city, which that's actually what Zimbabwe literally is translated to me. And so it is made of stone, and stone artifacts are actually very rare in Africa. And so they built their walls of stone. They had a huge wall system stretched for, hundreds and into the thousands of feet. But this is an example of a large city-state in Africa. That there weren't a lot of large city-states in Africa pre-1450. And so this is one of them on the east coast of Africa, southeastern coast. Like I said, this was a great example of a city-state that forms as a result of the Indian Ocean beginning to expand. Many Arabs are going to start arriving, wanting to exchange goods with these. Also, the Swahili city-states, a little bit north of Zimbabwe, will also develop as well. So the way I kind of teach Great Zimbabwe is that Africa is developing large city-states, advanced civilization, and not only that, but they are tied to this Indian Ocean as the years go on. So anyway.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, the Great Zimbabwe was actually believed to be one of the early locations where African slave trading is developing, where a lot of slaves were actually being either brought out of the Great Zimbabwe and then north to the Swahili city states that are further north and on the coast. I understand that correctly. I know that becomes a big part of the Islamic portion of the slave trade in the pre-1450 time period. And as I recall too, as far as Islamic slave systems were concerned, other Muslims were not supposed to be enslaved. They were protected peoples of the book, as were Christians and as were Jews in the Islamic slave systems. And so kind of reaching beyond the boundaries of Islamic Swahili coastal East African society, a lot of people from either the Great Zimbabwe or near the Great Zimbabwe were oftentimes utilized in that slave trade in the eastern part of Africa.
Yeah, so this is a slave trade prior to European arrival again, guys. So pre-1450 slaves. So understand, and we talked about this yesterday, the slave trade was an established a market, long before the Europeans arrived.
And we're in Africa now. I don't know if that was
Right.
mentioned at the beginning.
This is Africa, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we were in the Americas, the one before us, make sure they didn't know we were in Africa. But,
Yeah, we blessed the rains down in Africa.
oh, here comes the singing. 58,
Oh,
58. Yeah. Go, Millet, go.
It'll probably be about something that can bring another thing about music. It'll probably be something about Europe
or Australia.
Hey, Europe.
Oh, the Renaissance.
So this is kind of tricky because the Renaissance really begins actually, pre 1450. Not long before 1450 though, but really where we see the Renaissance, the effects of the Renaissance really take place is really after 1450. So this is kind of a tricky one. Just make sure that students, you guys understand that Renaissance begins pre 1450, but you really see the ramifications of this after 1450. A lot of the most famous of the Renaissance paintings and stuff actually will come about after 1450. But when the Renaissance really begins to start, like its earliest days, actually, it's 1450. So just make sure this is kind of one of those turning points in history. This is a big reason why 1450 is that turning point, that kind of dividing point that we see with how kind of history kind of divides history. This is kind of the beginning of modern history. This is when the Renaissance is when things are going to really start to change. Europe is going to go from a very poverty-stricken, illiterate part of the world to, because of the Renaissance, it's going to become very, very literate. So this is a huge turning point, the Renaissance is, and especially in regards to economic, intellectual, technological, social, all these things, political, major changes are about to occur. And it's the Renaissance that kind of really establishes that foundation for what we're about to see in Europe.
So when I talk about the Renaissance, I usually, because I'm not very diverse in all of the paintings and all the people and everything as Mr. Ferrell, I go with why did it happen, and then the ramifications of the Renaissance. So make sure that you know where this is primarily taking place in Italy, why that's taking place due to the trade influx there, and then the transition over the the centuries of all of these patrons that are patronizing all of these, very gifted artists throughout the centuries, and then this leading into the ramifications of more self-discovery and the change in art and how that will influence, life in itself.
Yeah, the big thing is this secularization that Renaissance is going to bring to Europe. This is where we really start to see, they move away from this medieval way of thinking where the church just dominates life, it dominates thought. Renaissance is going to kind of move them away from this.
Yeah, I when I teach the Renaissance, I teach a couple of things about it. One, it's as much as it is a rebirth of classical Greek and Roman intellect and cultural and architectural styles. A lot of the scientific and mathematical breakthroughs from Greek and Roman times are reborn here. As much as it's that, it's also a period of economic recovery and in many ways demographic recovery. I look at it as far as the Italian Renaissance and then the continued diffusion of Renaissance culture throughout the rest of Europe as really a turn away from sort of the darkest parts of the Dark Ages. This is, in the time after the Black Death, the onslaught of mid-14th century is finally subsiding a bit. There's a bit of a reprieve from that. And there's a bit of economic and demographic recovery that's happening. If you consider Europe was kind of in a sick situation in the 14th century prior to 1450, and the Renaissance culturally, economically, intellectually, and demographically really begins to allow for that sick time and that sick continent to finally start to recover and feel better and get better and become better as a way of thinking about it. I also look at the ramifications and the consequences of the Renaissance. Without the Renaissance, you might not have a lot of the new ideas and new ways of thinking and even new worldviews that people have. one of the major ideologies that come from this was humanism. And humanism began to really emphasize the ingenuity, creativity, and in many cases, the free will that humanity, that human beings have, that they are more responsible for their lot in life, the good and the bad, than other forces seen and unseen. And so when Mr. Ferrell talks about how Renaissance culture was one of secularizing of European culture, it's moving away from a very devout, faith-based understanding of the world and how the human being is really just, a small and basic element in a greater divine plan. What humanists try to do is really emphasize the greatness that human beings are, and it really starts to create a much more different worldview that people begin to have. And so without something like the Renaissance, you don't get some of the other developments that European culture will be known for in such a period of transition for them. You won't have things like the Protestant Reformation, and you won't have things like the scientific revolution, and you won't have things like the Enlightenment. The Renaissance in many ways was the world's greatest history lesson, in that, it was born out of the rebirth of dusting off old classical Greek and Roman books of knowledge, and then people questioning, scrutinizing, and criticizing those belief systems, and then adding their own. That happened in mathematics, it happened in science, it happened in medicine, it happened in art, it happened in architecture, and it really created a very lively, very urbanized, cultural trend for Europe. The other thing I would say is, what a great point of comparison you can make, because Europe wasn't the only society that had to deal with, the problems of the pre-modern world, especially with the bubonic plague, the Black Death. Places like China and the Middle East, also had to recover demographically, economically, and culturally. And I feel as though where the Renaissance was a big part of European culture, the recovery by the Ming Dynasty is so much after the Mongols are out of China and after the plague has subsided in China. They have a bit of a political, social, cultural, and intellectual recovery themselves, almost like a Chinese version of a Renaissance there, where Confucianism is. And really in both scenarios, the Italian Renaissance and even the recovery in China after the plague, the point of comparison here is the emphasis on an appreciation for their cultural and intellectual antiquity. And so what a great point of comparison you can make. So if you understand the Renaissance, you don't understand China's recovery after the plague, you can maybe see the parallels there to help you understand that. Or if you understand China's recovery after the plague and after the Mongols, but you don't understand the Renaissance, you could maybe see some parallels in that. So always look to compare things if you can, to try and make understanding of other topics.
Well, one last thing is, I know a lot of times when we think of the Renaissance, we always think of the painters and the art and everything, but there's also amazing literature that's done at this time. And so if they ask, say, an SAQ, LEQ, if the FRQ is about the Renaissance this time, something to look at earning a complexity point is what also happens right at this time period, the printing press. Yep. So a lot of times when we think of the Renaissance, we only think of, the intellectual part of the art that is always done, and the change in the art and the sculptures. And we think of, Raphael and Donatello and Da Vinci and all those guys and everything. But there is a massive change in the literature as well. And the reason that we're able to disseminate that so well is because the printing press is invented right here by Gutenberg as well. So again, you're tying all of those knots together, to weave this pattern. And I think that's really important that you can add in to try to get complexity here of those, combining things of those like things together.
Yeah, a great point. I said a lot about you don't have the scientific revolution or the Protestant Reformation or the Enlightenment without the Renaissance. Quite frankly, you don't have the Renaissance without the printing press.
Yeah.
So, all right. So are you good on this? Are we all good on this? Ferrell, any parting shots on the Renaissance?
Nope, that's good.
All right. Let's move on to Fit in 9.
Actually, I will say something real quick.
Of course he will.
It's not really, it has to do with the Renaissance. You go to the next one.
Of course it doesn't.
But I just had a thought, like one of the things, like what I would love to see now, we don't really know what this test is going to look like now, we know it's going to be written, that's all. But what a great prompt to say something like, why is 1450 a turning point in history? You know, why do historians choose, you know, this kind of this time period, this 1450? You know, I think that's a great way to tell, you know, who knows their stuff, who's learned history and who hasn't. You know, I don't know. That's just a thought that I had. So, and again, this assignment, or what we're doing here right now, is really good for students to kind of recognize that a little bit. Anyway.
All right, onward to 59, the Safavid Empire. And I know I've mentioned these empires before, but we did a pretty extensive study on land-based empires in my class back in, I don't know, the September, October, somewhere in there, October-ish. And the Safavid Empire was certainly one of those land-based empires based out of parts of Central Asia, South Asia, where current-day Iran is located. The Safavid Empire was one of our 3 gunpowder empires, and I described them as, of the 3 gunpowder empires, it was sort of late to the game of gunpowder. It was actually, it had gunpowder utilized against it in its territorial issues that turned to conflict with the Ottoman Empire, which bordered them in parts of Southwest Asia. And of course, because the Safavids did not use gunpowder at that point in time, the Ottomans made pretty quick work of them, and that prompted Safavid leadership to begin to integrate gunpowder into their societies. And once they did, they became a much more formidable opponent there in Iran, and were able to really kind of hold their ground, hold their territory amidst, being sandwiched between the Mughal Empire and the Ottoman Empire. So yeah, it was one of our gunpowder empires, one of our land-based empires. A lot of things that I did in trying to compare them with the other land-based empires, in terms of their religion, in terms of their development in art and architecture, and the use of religion and the use of art and architecture in their legitimizing of political rule. And another thing that I wanted to mention about them is, like the Ottoman and like the Mughal, they are still standing strong and a prominent empire there in the south part of Asia and the central part of Asia, with the arrival of Europeans, with the arrival of the Portuguese and the eventual arrival of the French, the British, and the Dutch. The Safavids have a little bit of coastal South Asia there near the Persian Gulf. And even though they have to do battle with some of these groups, they're still going to be retained throughout, a lot of this time period, in spite of external challenges that they may be dealing with that they had not had to deal with, in earlier times. What do you guys think, kids? Need to know about the Safavids?
So this is an Islamic empire, right? Much like all of the gunpowder empires. However, the Safavid Empire was established via Twelver Shiism. So this is a little difference, between this empire and the others. Is this is Shia Islam that is establishing this empire. So not Sunni Islam, which is what you see with the Ottoman Empire, the Abbasid Empire, your Mughal Empire, right? All of these are state sponsored by Islam, but largely Sunni Islam. That's kind of what is dominating them. However, this is a different form of Islam. And by the way, even still to this day, most Shia Muslims actually live in this region that the Safavid Empire actually ruled over, which is Iran. So just kind of wanted to throw that in there too. But yeah, this is a gunpowder empire, like Mr. Millett said. As he said, it was very powerful. Now, the Safavid Empire was not as durable as your Mughal, especially your Ottoman. This empire will fall before 1750. So this is less durable than the other 3, I would say, too. So I wanted to kind of throw those in there. And a big reason for that is they're sandwiched between the Mughal and the Ottoman. And, of course, the Ottoman Empire put a lot of pressure on the Safavid Empire throughout. I mean, the Ottoman Empire was constantly looking to expand throughout this time. And that did not bode well for the Safavid Empire. So I wanted to throw that in there, too.
One last thing I think that, like, Mr. Millett always likes to do is with a comparison here in the Safavid, is that their political structure, social structure was very similar to that of Europe, where they have a hierarchy, and they weren't as as open or so what I'm looking for. They didn't allow the diversity that the other gunpowder empires like the Ottomans allowed, and as a result, they're going to be conquered. The quickest of them all. So that's something you can do kind of as a compare contrast between the Europeans and this empire and the other gunpowder empires.
Yeah, no, good stuff. I do. You're right, Caskey. I like to compare. I just find that that's another way of kids making connections to help, with their greater understanding. But yeah, great stuff on the Safavid Empire. Very important gunpowder and Islamic empire during this period of time. And again, we kept mentioning the Ottomans there, and of course they were a Sunni Islamic empire, whereas this one was a Shia Islamic empire. As great as the Safavids and even the Mughal may have been, the Ottoman Empire really sort of was the recognized Islamic leader of the Islamic world. They were the ones that controlled Mecca and Medina and Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo, and then of course Istanbul, or what we used to know as Constantinople. And so the Safavids never got to the size of the Ottomans, never got to the regional and multi-regional status that the Ottoman Empire did. Didn't get to the military development and naval development that the Ottoman Empire did, but still very formidable in their own right, which is worthy of noting that here in this period of time. All right, anything else on the Safavids from you guys?
I'm good.
All right, good job, good stuff. All right, here we have the Second Industrial Revolution. And I think it's going to be important here, and of course I move you down, I got to move you back up. I think it's important here maybe to distinguish. I know one of our earlier ones was the First Industrial Revolution. We can see it's happening in the same time period as the First Industrial Revolution, but maybe understand some points of distinction, what made it so much more different or so much more impactful or long-reaching, whatever we might want to say about it. As many societies were at least going through a First Industrial Revolution, when it came to the Second Industrial Revolution, I feel like it really, for societies that were going through this, there was a far greater reach of the benefits of industrialization in the Second Industrial Revolution. And I feel like the Second Industrial Revolution had a greater reach on modern society, how life is lived today, than maybe even the First Industrial Revolution had, where you get, your more electrical and urban electrification and illumination with street lights and with the factory systems becoming more efficient, becoming more productive, with consumer products, consumer goods becoming more readily available. People's material well-being, material life is certainly progressing during this period of time. I feel like in many ways the Second Industrial Revolution has a greater reach and hold on modern life than maybe even the first. What do you all think kids need to understand about the Second Industrial Revolution?
Second Industrial Revolution. First thing I think is transportation technologies. In the First Industrial Revolution, you've got the steam engine leading to the locomotive, the steamship. Now with the Second Industrial Revolution, now you've got the movement to flight, airplanes.
Big deal.
Yeah, you have cars. You have Millette just mentioned the factory systems becoming better and more efficient. Well, a big part of that is Henry Ford's assembly line. Providing now cheaper automobiles. His goal was to make the automobile cheap enough so that his very workers could buy one. They're making things affordable that, years before would not have even been thought imaginable. And the Second Industrial Revolution is kind of allowing that stuff to happen. So that's the first thing I think of when I think of the Second Industrial Revolution is the massive changes to transportation. You mentioned electricity, right? That's a biggie. That's another thing I mentioned. Third thing I think of is also steel. The introduction of steel and oil. Oh man, these are game changers. Steel will allow for larger, more durable structures to be built. Skyscrapers now, cities can now build vertically rather than horizontally, right? This is huge. It's going to lead to much denser populations. So the second industrial revolution, these industrialized countries now need new resources. That's a big reason why we see this colonization in Africa occur due to this second industrial revolution. So anyway, that's kind of what I think when I think the second industrial revolution.
Toilet paper.
Why
By the way,
you were going to say that?
By the way, to my students, because I'm trying to get them to watch these Steve Heimler videos, which all students should watch them. They're awesome. I'm sure some of you guys already have. The one that I got them, because I'm trying to get them interested in his videos, he has one on toilet paper and why, how it came to be and all that stuff. So I thought it would be very relevant to us today.
With the second industrial revolution, we did everything through inventions, and toilet paper was one of our presentations. And there were a lot of good presentations. And I think that the only thing that also that hasn't been mentioned yet is communication. So we see the telegraph, and then the telephone, movies. All of those things result as the second industrial revolution, which is huge. We're able to finally, photography had kind of been invented right before this, but it was kind of janky. And so you see the best versions of the late 1800s photography come about, and they start to really get good with photography and all those things. But really all these inventions truly for the first time globalize the world, with all the different countries being able to massive communicate, travel, trade, all those things together. And it really propels us into a technologically advanced 20th century. And it changes everything to what we know today. And I think a lot of my kids were really good. And one of the things that we did kind of an argument of what was the most important invention. And they almost always came back to, obviously, the steam engine is really where it starts to kick things off. But there were a few really good other arguments for things like pasteurization, which is super important for our food today. And that's going to change what? Lives are going to be living longer lives. People have richer, fuller lives. More inventions are created. And so it's this domino effect to where, again, if you're looking at why is 1750 important? Well, it's right before the first industrial revolution, which kicks us to the second, which gets us to 1900, where we see things really skyrocket to what it is in 2020.
Yeah, Mr. Caskey, I'm glad you mentioned that, the importance of the advances in medicine. You mentioned pasteurization. A lot of people were dying due to the things they were drinking. And, now that's not happening. But the vaccine to smallpox is a big one. So now not all these thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, maybe the millions of people are dying due to smallpox.
Refrigeration.
Yeah, so that's something we don't want to forget too. Another aspect of the industrial revolutions, is the advances in medicine, which is very relevant to us today.
Yeah, even more so than ever.
Yeah, I those are all great points. In a lot of ways, I feel like the second industrial revolution was kind of the cleanup crew of the dirty, environmentally smoggy, nasty, non-hygienic, unsanitary first industrial revolution. The industrialization has this unique way of sort of self-improving. And I feel like the second industrial revolution was kind of like, life after they figured out how to get rid of the impurity of the first industrial revolution. Not to say that the second industrial revolution, but not even in just an urban way or a technological or intellectual or medical way. And many of those things were certainly there. But even in just a labor and hierarchical way, in societies that went through the second industrial revolution, worker wages increased, worker hours were reduced, worker living conditions improved. Now that benefit wasn't shared to absolutely everybody, but these things did improve, and in many ways it had a lot to do with the political and economic ideologies of the day kind of fighting for these. The success of socialism in Europe, for example, provided livable wages and increased wages and better living and working conditions for working class people. It's probably a big reason why there wasn't the fallout of a great class war or of a communist revolution Europe-wide or worldwide. I really do feel like the Second Industrial Revolution was kind of the cleanup act, kind of the cleanup crew after the First Industrial Revolution was maybe a bit, a bit imperfect and a bit, unclean in a lot of its changes that happened. I also look at this too, countries that really, really lead the way in the Second Industrial Revolution. England's still going to be there. They were the leader of the first, and they're still going to be a major player in the Second Industrial Revolution. The United States will also. But to be honest with you, folks, when you think of the Second Industrial Revolution, you got to hand it to Germany at this point in time. Germany's development in steel and iron production and heavy industry after they unified in 1871 was just unprecedented on mainland continental Europe. Germany is gonna take the reins of really leading Europe in the Second Industrial Revolution in their development of chemicals and their development of automobiles, things like this. By 1900, man, they are just they are pushing and really starting to catch up and maybe even surpassing in some cases England's industrial output. And then, of course, on the other side of the world, we can't forget Japan. Japan is going to go through its industrial revolution while a lot of the Western world and here in the United States, we were going through our second industrial revolution. Japan is going to be right there with us. So, this is going to definitely have a greater global reach and a greater reach on modern life today. Second industrial revolution. Anything else you guys wanted to say about this as parting shots?
What urbanization? Forgot about that.
And then you guys in your class, you did like an urban game.
Yeah, I did the urban drawing game, and they loved it and hated it. But yeah, urbanization and how cities change and how life changes at a local level was dramatic, where people had basically been farmers for millennia, and now most people aren't farmers anymore, and that's all because of the Second Industrial Revolution.
That's one of those things. Would you rather be like some of the Facebook stuff we were talking about? I think you saw some of that, Ferrell. What would you rather be? Would you rather be an industrial worker in the First Industrial Revolution or the Second? Would you rather have been a citizen of London during the First Industrial Revolution or the Second? Would you have rather have been a working class member of Parisian society in the First or in the Second Industrial Revolution, and why? Why one over the other? It kind of gets into the intricacies of how the cities improved, how the cities cleaned up, how the cities sanitized, how the cities became, a little bit more protected with police and fire departments and things like that.
I think my kids would make a good argument against that. They pick the first. I think a lot of my kids would pick the first because they'd make a good argument against the second of how horrible the children were treated in the factories. And all of them be like, hey, I don't want to lose a limb. I want to get my head chopped off, especially, with the girls and the long hair and stuff. I think they'd argue against it.
Well, to be honest with you, that really depends on where you are.
So it's situational. Sure.
If you were in England, things actually started to get a little bit better for English children earlier. But if you were in the United States, we don't start getting child labor laws on state levels until after 1900, and then federal child labor laws much later than that.
Yeah,
if you what would you rather have been? A child laborer in Boston in 1880 or a child laborer in Berlin? I'm going with Berlin.
Yeah.
No doubt about it, or London even.
Good stuff.
Good stuff. Ferrell?
I'm good with that.
All right. Let's move it forward to 61. To Roger Maris's home run record of old. Hey, the Sepoy Rebellion. The Sleepy Rebellion. That's how people looked in the department meeting this morning.
Yeah.
And a sort of Sepoy rebellious look. The Sepoy Rebellion. I guess we don't want to use the term again. I mean, why do that, right?
I forgot to add them on.
Yeah, why have it? Are they on the rest of them?
No.
1750 to 1900, it's the Sepoy Rebellion, just so you can see that, right? It's all the same. I'll just keep doing this the whole time. 1750 to 1900 was the Sepoy Rebellion. I love teaching the Sepoy Rebellion. I really do. And I as far as it being a testimonial to the strained relationship between a colonized society and an imperialistic society. Being that it happened in India, you can see the strained relationship of that imperial relationship between Great Britain and India played out in the Sepoy Rebellion, the Great Sepoy Rebellion of 1857. What do you guys think? What do kids need to know about the Sepoy Rebellion?
I'm going to fix those while you're doing that.
All right,
You
then
want
I'll
to start
go.
off?
Yeah, I'll go. So Sepoys. So just if you guys don't remember exactly what this was, so you have Sepoys basically are people living in India, right? They are part of the military. They're military personnel. And in this way, and in this case, it's actually it's a personal military. This is the British East India Company's army. So sepoys are employed in the military of the British East India Company, their own little private army, and they they are forced to and if I'm wrong here, you guys can fix this. But basically, well, let me go back a little bit. So this British East India Company, we talked about this in another video. This was a joint stock company that had become very, very prominent in affairs in the Mughal India, here, in the Mughal Empire. And to the point where, your leadership in the Mughal Empire, they're pretty much puppets at this point. In many ways, the British East India Company is kind of running the show. And many people didn't like this because as more British people start to flood into India, it becomes more and more Western. And so remember, what is the religion of people living in England? Christians, right? They're not Hindu, they're not Muslim. And so a lot of people aren't really digging this whole Westernization going on in India. So as England becomes more and more prominent in India, many people in India felt like their values, their religious values were being forced to change. Well, it kind of culminates into this event. So these sepoys, they're kind of being forced to when they go to reload this new rifle. What kind of gun is it, Emsa? You probably know. You're a gun guy, right?
It's the Enfield, right?
Enfield rifle, yeah. And so this Enfield rifle, it now, it's not like the old rifle, like a Springfield rifle or whatever. Anyways, but this Enfield
they're
rifle,
giving them old guns.
they're giving them old guns. Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Anyways, but they're forcing them when they have to reload the cartridge that they have to unpack with their mouth, by the way, because they got to hold their gun in one hand and they got to reload real quickly, to put the stuff into the gun. It's actually laced with I think a mixture of cow and pig fat. And of course, if you're a Hindu or a Muslim, that's a problem for you, right? You can't put your mouth anywhere near that stuff. So they felt like this was a slap in their face. They felt like this was, again, another example of the British coming in and trying to force their policies that go against their culture. And so they mutiny. They basically say, we're not going to do this. We don't want to be a part of this. And this angers, obviously, the British East India Company. This is going to hurt finances here. This is going to hurt because they can't run their business in this fashion without these sepoys. And so Queen Victoria at the time, is the 1800s, she sends in troops. A rebellion breaks out. And, of course, millions of people are killed during this rebellion. Largely Indian people living in India. These are citizens that are dying mostly. And they put down the rebellion, and Queen Victoria and the British decide we're going to go in and outright colonize this. So the Sepoy Rebellion marks a huge change here in the 1800s. Now, the Mughal Empire is no longer. It is forced to eliminate itself, essentially. And now the British come in, and now they've colonized India. So that's kind of the Sepoy Rebellion kind of marks that major event.
Caskey, did you want to add to that?
I think you can move. I was fixing the thing. Now I can't.
Okay. Oh, that's fine. I was going to add a couple of things too. Again, from a comparative lens, the Sepoy Rebellion truly was a violent and becomes, even though it was, military mercenary started, it becomes an even greater popular rebellion against imperial, oppression, or at least perceived as such. What a great comparison with how other societies and groups of people reacted toward imperialism. The Sepoy Rebellion can be compared to something like the Boxer Rebellion. The Boxer Rebellion that took place in China about 45 years later, after the Sepoy Rebellion, was a great point of comparison. Essentially, the desire for the Chinese population, like the Indian population, to push foreign imperialism out of their country. In both of those situations, the Mughal government and the Qing government actually came to support the revolutionary movements of the Sepoy, and then later on the Qing through their support behind the Boxers. And so really the ways in which these societies reacted toward the imminent imperialism that was there was quite similar. And also the outcomes and the long-term consequences were very similar. Both the Sepoy Rebellion and the Boxer Rebellion were put down by those imperialist states. The British put down the Sepoy, made India a royal colony, and would be that way until right after World War II. And the Mughal dynasty was displaced. The Boxer Rebellion, in a similar fashion, right, is going to be put down. Foreign influence is going to increase in China rather than decrease. And really, it's just a matter of years, a decade, by the time the Qing dynasty is overthrown. So they're not put out as quickly as the Mughal were put out, but still very similar in terms of what happened in the long run.
But again, difference there, since we're comparing. So Sepoy Rebellion, we see outright colonization occur by England, whereas with China, it's really more of a sphere of influence kind of will remain. So
yeah. At any rate, China will have to deal with, the influx of foreigners coming in and controlling those spheres of influence after that Boxer Rebellion was put down. I know in my class we did reactions by African societies toward imperialism, and I think a lot of the violent resistance that African societies showed against the English or against the French or against the Germans,
Italians,
or against the Italians in the case of Ethiopia, so much of them met the same fate and the same outcome as the Sepoy Revolt, with the exception of the Ethiopian resistance there against the Italians. But again, if you're trying to understand one of these rebellions, if you can see the bigger picture and see the parallels and the connections with other revolts at the time, it'll help your understanding of the Sepoys that much better. All right, are we good on 61?
Yep.
word.
All right, let's do it. So then 62 is the 7 Years' War. And
can you refresh?
Yeah, let me stop share real quick.
Because I fixed it.
I'll come back to it.
You should see all changes saved in Drive.
Last edit was made 4 minutes
Bang,
ago.
bang, bang, bang.
Is there a refresh that I can hit? Or what if I just refresh the whole doc?
Yeah.
That's what I'll try.
And then restart the presentation. Should be fixed.
What number were we on? 61?
That was the Sepoy.
So kids, while you're waiting for,
Did we get the main guy's name? What's his name?
What?
Did we get the main guy's name? Was he mentioned?
Guy.
Oh, in the Sepoy Revolt?
Yeah.
I did not.
Oh, what's his name?
You talking about the main guy that led the rebellion in the beginning?
Yeah.
I can't remember.
In the Sepoy Rebellion, I have no idea.
So
but
one
hit,
of the things,
a name drop of that helps, for an essay.
it does. Want me to look that up real quick?
It's up to you. It doesn't matter to me.
Anyways, well, kids, while we're waiting on that to come back up, great thing to do, and what my family's been doing is we have Nerf gun wars to pass the time. So if you guys get bored, Nerf guns are really fun. Just don't hit your parents in the eye. That's a bad thing. Shoot your eye out, kid.
Parents is where they will shoot.
Love
All
this
right.
thing, man.
I think we're back up and running there. Thank you, Mr. Caskey, for fixing those past few slides. And so now we're on to the 7 Years' War, which, you know what, I find this funny. And in my class, I made, terrible jokes about, wars are so original in their name that we name them after how long they lasted. We've had the 100 Years' War and the 30 Years' War and the 7 Years' War. In European history, there was a 9 Years' War. Later on in the 20th century, there's a 6 Days' War. I'm really looking forward to like the 3-minute and 33-second war.
The War of 1812.
I think we can get to that. But you know what I find interesting about the 7 Years' War is that the 7 Years' War lasted from 1754 until 1763.
9 years.
Which I'm no mathematician, but something just doesn't quite add up. Anyway, I know, I don't get it. I mean, if we're going to call it something, let's call it what it is. It'd be 9 Years' War 2.
Like
this 9 Years' War that Louis fought happened
this
earlier.
This video is going to last 7 years.
Oh, well, that's because you keep showing off Nerf guns and other arsenal in your home there.
Well, if somebody would have done this the way they were supposed to do the video, it wouldn't be a problem.
Oh yeah, it's true. Had these periods and numbers and terms have been aligned, more quickly, we could have gotten this done.
They were done by the time you were done blabbing about the Sepoy.
The only issue I had is I forgot to add an S to the 95 Theses.
At least you didn't add an F instead of the TH.
That's true. So 7 Years' War. All right. So this is, I refer to this war as really kind of our first real global war, because this war is actually fought all over the globe. It's really not just a war fought in Europe. Of course, in the Americas, right, you have the French and Indian War, which is kind of, our version of the 7 Years' War, the part of the 7 Years' War that takes place, in the North American theater. And but the 7 Years' War truly is kind of that first global war. Of course, this happens right at the beginning of this period, right, like he said, 1754 to 1763. And this was kind of the moment that we begin to see Europe really prove to the world that they are now very prominent when it comes to politics and world affairs. This really establishes England as the most prominent, dominant. They establish hegemony, right, as we like to use that term, as a result of the 7 Years' War. But yeah, I mean, when I think of the 7 Years' War, that's kind of the thing I think of. It's really our global war. It's a war that really establishes Europe as this kind of prominent place. Europe is going to really kind of begin land grabbing around the world at this point. So, and like I said, and this is ultimately going to lead to the American Revolution. So this is kind of a turning point in history, right? And that it leads to European prominence, but it also is going to lead to essentially the revolutions that are going to break out.
Caskey, did you want to add on to that?
No, he got it. That was good.
Yeah, when Ferrell talked about the 7 Years' War being a global conflict and a land grab for England, it really was that. Not only was there the French and Indian War portion of that in North America, but between the British and the French predominantly. But man, not only there in the current United States, but there were land grabs in Canada. There were naval conflicts that happened between the English and the French in the Caribbean. We'd also see in some of the parts of the Philippines, the Philippines were a Spanish colony at the time. It was not uncommon for the English and the French to have economic interest in gaining some trade concessions and privileges, even in Spanish colonies. And then probably just as important would be the land grab that's taking place in India. As much as England would establish its hegemony after this in North America, it also did it in India as well. And, we just talked about the Sepoy Revolt. Had England not won the 7 Years' War, the chances of them sort of kicking out the French from India and really becoming the more dominant European presence in India, the British East India Company and then the advent of the Sepoy Revolt being down, and then India becoming a royal colony might not have happened without the 7 Years' War. So in many cases, it really was a global conflict that put England a cut above the other European states at this time, to include France mainly.
Yep, I'm good.
Let's move ahead here. Onward to 63, the Silk Roads began. And this is going to be a pre-1450 when the Silk Roads began. One of our, I always teach it this way. And then I had a student 2 years ago when she was a sophomore named Jenna Justin and what a phenomenal kid she is. She would she would bring my vision that I had up here in my head that I was verbalizing to the students. She made this vision into reality, and I'm drawing that I have in my classroom now. Anyway, I always tell the kids, when we think of trade routes, I want us to think of like the Vegas Strip, where you see like all the casinos and all the big like neon lights that are flashing where the casinos and hotels and restaurants are. And when you think of trade routes in world history, the very first one that you should see in the biggest, brightest red neon light should be the Silk Road flashing just like that. That should be like going off in your head. And then I said maybe the Indian Ocean should be right behind that. Maybe the Trans-Sahara trade could be maybe off to the distance there. But flashing in the most vibrant lights should be the Silk Road. And she drew this. I wish I had it with me right now, but it's in my classroom. She drew this wonderful Vegas Strip at night and put the Silk Road and all the other trade routes there, but made the Silk Road that much more prominent. I just think the Silk Road is so vital in the interaction and exchange of pre-modern world history that it was a big reason why societies were able to progress, to move ahead, to improve, to exchange, probably more so than any other trade route in the pre-modern period. I'm a Silk Road fanatic here. There's so much we could get into with the beginning and the impact of the Silk Road. Let's try and think what are some things that kids definitely need to understand about the Silk Road as it pertains to pre-modern world history.
Well, I mean, like many of these trade routes, I mean, you're talking about technologies being introduced and spreading. I mean, these trade routes are a big reason why the Eastern Hemisphere is so more advanced than the Western Hemisphere. We got done talking about the Aztecs earlier today, and it's how backwards they were. They didn't have the interactions that we see in the Eastern Hemisphere, and the Silk Roads paved the way for that, literally. But you have technological, developments that occur. You have religious developments occur. Diseases are spread, kind of the downside, right? So, I mean, these trade routes are so vital in the development of history, probably more so than any other reason. I mean, without these trade routes like the Silk Roads, I mean, the Eastern Hemisphere doesn't develop. History doesn't even happen the way it does. It doesn't advance and progress without these interactions that are occurring. So, I mean, the importance, excuse me, the importance of the Silk Roads is just, I mean, so gigantic. So, I don't know. It's like, where do I start with this one? But yeah.
Caskey, did you want to chime in?
I would just add on that why are they going and where they're going. So make sure you guys know kind of the beginning and end points here. And then why these individuals want to go to East Asia and back and forth, what they're trading and what the long-term ramifications are with the trade in culture, language, technology, clothes, all that good stuff is going to happen as a result.
Oh, and last thing I wanted to mention too, because I talk about this in my class, I'm sure you guys do too, is how important this is for the development of the empires. I mean, think about this. The Mongol Empire, they built their empire around the Silk Road. So that tells you how important these things are, to the development of empires as well. These empires can become wealthy due to these trade routes. So they do everything to embrace these trade routes. The Mongols went to great lengths to secure these trade routes, to make them safe for travelers. So that's another thing I wanted to add too, is how these trade routes develop because of the empires, and these empires become great because of the trade routes. So.
Yeah, those are all great points. A lot of the things that made the Silk Roads really work were the imperial governments uh, building the roads, adding the infrastructure, and then policing them and managing them, collecting tax and tribute from them, protecting the caravans of people and goods that traveled across. That was a big reason for it. I would also suggest too that the Silk Road linked up a lot of major cities in the
Yes.
Eastern Hemisphere, and the marketplaces of those cities were they had magnetic effects in bringing foreign merchants and foreign peoples into these places, and so you really get a lot of diversifying of the marketplaces of large cities, places like Baghdad and places like Chang'an, Baghdad in Iraq and Chang'an in China. These places were instrumental in not only the receiving of goods and technologies and crops and things like this, but also in the dissemination of it. Their marketplaces were places that merchants, dreams of merchant wealth were coming true in places like that. And so, to be honest with you, the cities and not just the big mega, cities like those, but even the smaller sort of oasis towns that are forming in sort of the peripheral places from the major zones of civilization, they're going to develop in a lot of ways their own kind of identities as well. I compare this with other great land-based routes like the Trans-Sahara trade, where there is a lot of adverse topography that people have to work through in their travels, be it the desert of Sahara or the deserts that were out in in Asia, whether it be the Gobi or the Taklamakan or even more western with like your Syrian and Mesopotamian desert. Difficult and arduous terrain to get through. Mountain passes were great because mountain ranges were difficult to travel through, but people did it. I'd also like to mention that this is more than just economic and merchants that are doing this, but a lot of missionaries and diplomats were traveling the Silk Roads, and it was actually probably more common that a missionary rather than a merchant would actually travel across national borders, especially since they needed to go into foreign lands to achieve the mission of spreading their native religion to foreign lands. But Islam, Christianity, Buddhism are main religions that are going to be spread because of the work of missionaries, the travel of missionaries, as well as the travel of merchants during this period of time. And so this is as much a cultural and religious spread as it is trade and economics. In fact, I've tried to wean myself away from calling them trade routes and really calling them systems of exchange, because the exchanges are more than just commercial. The exchanges are biological. The exchanges are cultural and religious and technological. Let us also not forget that as much great things progressively traveled across the Silk Road, destructive things did too. Destructive things like the Black Death, the outbreak of the plague, is going to become more widespread because of the ease and accessibility that the Silk Road gave to such vulnerable urban populations. Technologies were a big part of it: gunpowder, paper making, refining of sugar and sugar cane, things like this, citrus fruit. All these sorts of things were major elements of the Silk Road. And so what a great trade route this was in pre-modern world.
Yeah, and last thing, the Silk Roads will, it'll still be utilized even as you get into period 2. But with the increased use of maritime-based trade, as time kind of goes on, and then especially the Industrial Revolution was, is essentially going to make the Silk Roads completely useless at this point. So by the time you get into period 3, Silk Roads isn't really being utilized at all. So I wanted to mention that too. So it begins pre-1450, but it is still being utilized in period 2 as well.
Caskey, anything else? All right. 64. Simón Bolívar leads in Latin America. And there is the period of time, 1750 to 1900 leads. I'm going to take a stab at this. Leads in what? Leads in revolutionary activity. Simon Bolivar has sometimes been referred to as the George Washington of Colombia, or the George Washington of Latin America, because of his leadership in the independence movements of Gran Colombia, and ultimately some of the states of South America that would break apart from that Gran Colombia and become the independent states of South America today, to include Colombia and Bolivia and a host of others in South America. So Simon Bolivar is going to be in many ways comparable to George Washington in his leadership militarily, and his leadership in the independence movement and the independence movements of Latin America. Would be Simon Bolivar. So when I teach about Bolivar, I teach him as one of these Atlantic revolutionaries. He is one of the latter ones, because the Latin American revolutions are happening after the 1800 mark. They're happening after 1810 in a lot of cases, and for Bolivar, they are happening in the latter part of even later than that, in the 1820s, 1830s. Do we see a lot of Bolivar's revolutionary movements happening? So I feel as though, because of the success of the Enlightenment, the success of the American Revolution, what gains were made by the French Revolution, and even the success of the Haitian Revolution, this really taught people of Latin America that they didn't have to live under oppressive colonial systems that Spain and Portugal may have placed them under. They didn't have to live under that sort of caste system that we looked at in an earlier part of this review of the Zito and mulatto and the sort of lower classes based on race, based on wealth, based on family and marriage. They didn't have to live in that restrictive hierarchy, that they could in fact carve out their own independent political systems, independent of Western Europe, independent of Spain and Portugal. And Bolivar is going to be there to lead the way. He had a lot of examples that preceded him that he would follow, and because of that, Bolivar's revolutions were so successful. What do you guys think? What are some things we need to have our kids understand about Bolivar leading those revolutions in Latin America?
I want the students to know he's a Creole. This is a guy his parents are Peninsulares. This is a guy of privilege. Simon Bolivar is. He was educated in Europe. So this is a guy that, he is being taught all about this Enlightenment. He knows the Enlightenment. He knows it in and out, right? He knows all these ideas and wants to bring them to South America. And so he is, like Millette said, is going to lead several of these revolutions throughout South America. He was so impressed. Millette talked about how he was referred to as the kind of the George Washington of the Latin American revolutions. The reason they call him that is, he was so impressed with the American Revolution and how you take all these separate colonies and they formed a unified state, a unified nation. And he thought he could do that for parts of South America. And he tried, but unfortunately, with these Latin American colonies, they were all so very different, so unique from each other, more so than even the American colonies were. And he never could quite get that unification. Not only that, but you have to remember something, and I teach this to my students. One of the big reasons why these Latin American colonies had a difficult time creating unification and then ultimately kind of long-term success, long-term stability. While they're under colonization by the Spanish ruled very directly. Remember, the Spanish colonies were royal colonies. These were colonies directly ruled. They by the Spanish. They sent in the Audiencias and all of these guys, and they really made the viceroys. Yeah. They made these viceroys. They made these decisions on behalf of the people. These are people being sent from the King of Spain to these colonies, and they're making the decisions. These viceroys are extensions of the king. So these people there was no idea of self-rule, no sense of government or any of that. Whereas in the English colonies, these were private enterprises. They weren't as closely maybe tied to the king as the Spanish colonies were. So there was a measure of self-government. All of these colonies had their own little governments. Now, I'm not saying that they made all of their own decisions, because there still was that tie to England. But there was a lot more autonomy, I guess you could say, within the American colonies. And so you have a lot of leaders that really understood politics and understood how to create maybe more of a stable, successful government. And you don't really see that in these Latin American colonies. What you're going to see are these Latin American colonies, many of them fall under military dictatorships. Whereas the American colonies, they don't do that. They're able, because they unified, they're able to put together a constitution that really, I mean, exemplifies very well, and many Enlightenment ideas within their constitution. And these Latin American colonies had difficulty in doing that. It's always one of those big questions. What would have happened if Simon Bolivar was able to unify these South American colonies, and would it have transformed into these military dictatorships that they eventually will? This caudillo rule, we call it. Sorry.
Caskey, did you want to chime in?
Nope.
All right. Good job on Bolivar. I would venture to say that it's still likely and still possible to see something on that Jamaica letter in this modified exam that he wrote. Maybe we'll do a crash course on Bolivar's Jamaica letter, do a little 10-minute clip on that or something. But yeah, you just never know. Bolivar, big deal in the age of independence.
By the way, too, there are Bolivar statues all over the United States. There's a huge statue right near Lincoln Monument there in D.C. There's a huge statue right at the entrance of Central Park in New York City. He, left his mark even here in the United States.
So you can imagine why the United States at the time may have been supportive of someone like Bolivar. When you guys get into your U.S. history classes next year, you're going to learn about the Monroe Doctrine. And one of the things about the Monroe Doctrine was they wanted to get rid of, pretty much any European political and military influence in the Western Hemisphere. And Bolivar was doing that by defeating the Spanish. So a lot of times these Latin American revolutions, had a bit of at least morale and support by the United States while this was happening. All right, let's move on to 65. 65, social Darwinism is created 1750 to 1900. And of course, you can't have social Darwinism unless you've had Darwinism already created, right? So social Darwinism will be created. I teach social Darwinism in my class as an important element of imperialism, and more specifically, as one of the justifications for why imperialist countries did what they did to the underdeveloped world. I also teach it as the inherent condescension and racism that comes with it. We're building empire. England is building empire in Africa or in Australia, not for the benefit of the English empire, but for the benefit of these lesser evolved peoples that by our presence and our progress and our infrastructure and our culture, we're going to pull you out of darkness and pull you out of your childish and rudimentary ways, and we're going to make you more civilized of a person in a sort of condescending and very racially motivated way. That they had this moral obligation to do this. I taught it as kind of the public reason why they did what they did, to sort of disguise the harsh reality reasons of why they did what they did, and that was to pursue their own empire's economic interests and political interests and military interests. Social Darwinism was there to justify it. In fact, I use a little Mary Poppins song to explain this, where the medicine, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. I think the medicine were these moral obligations and justifications. The sugar was the moral obligations like social Darwinism and humanitarianism and Christian missionaries, where the sugar to help the hard to swallow pills go down, because the hard to swallow pills to go down were the harsh, real reasons of economics and politics and military, as to why they were there. But social Darwinism, just the racial ideology that set the stage for modern racism between the developed and underdeveloped world. What do you guys think? What should these kids know about social Darwinism?
I mean, you pretty much said most everything they needed to know. I mean, as you said, this is justification for why we are doing this. You know, I use as an example of this is the moving out west. A lot of my kids, man, one thing they learned from 8th grade American history was
Manifest Destiny.
Manifest Destiny. And essentially, you know, that's what that was about. You know, this is our God-given right, you know, to move west. And you know, many European countries and also, you know, many Western societies, they felt that, you know, this was their justification for why they are doing this, why they are. We are the prominent civilization, you know, and then of course this has a tie-in to that whole idea of white man's burden, you know. That so therefore now it becomes our duty to civilize these people, you know, it's our duty to bring medicine to them, to bring you know, technology to them. So you know, and again, you bring in that whole the Industrial Revolution, you know, is also, you know, you can bring into this. So yeah, I mean, you said most of that.
Caskey, anything to add?
Sometimes I throw in the word there. This is propaganda.
Yeah, I would agree. In many ways, it was social Darwinism, one of the elements of imperialism in the late 1800s. 66, the Song Dynasty. I tell you, this is put this in the Wayback Machine, because it's been a while since our students had to look at anything related to the Song Dynasty. And to be honest with you, I'm going to make my podcast that I created for the beginning, first half of the school year, reintroduce those to my students over the next, you know, several weeks before they take the exam. But I have an entire podcast just on East Asian society, and it goes into the Song Dynasty quite a bit. But yeah, the Song Dynasty is still in power barely at the beginning of this course, which on that circa 1200 mark. It's not going to be too long after that where it's going to be displaced by nomadic invasions, and then also ultimately displaced by the Mongolian invasion there. But the Song Dynasty, oftentimes seen as a golden age in China's dynastic history. A lot of economic and technological, intellectual, and artistic advancements are happening during the Song Dynasty. And then to really kind of understand China's status in their little region of the world there in the Far East. But you know, all great things come to an end, and the Song Dynasty would unfortunately, for them, succumb to Mongolian takeover. What do you guys think? What are some things that you want your kids to understand about the Song Dynasty?
Go ahead, Caskey.
I would just say, yeah, they start to kind of during the Song Dynasty, not at the end here during our time period, but they're repairing the Great Wall, they're building Great Canal, they're having great advancements in medicine. They are moving forward with trade. The great roads are built. We see probably the best unification of Asia during this time period before things kind of fall apart. We see a lot of economic problems start to befall them because they start stretching themselves too thin. And then the invaders from the north are able to come down and conquer them. And from there, they're kind of just taken advantage of for the next few centuries.
Yeah, I just teach the Song Dynasty as this is the golden age of China during their reign. A lot of technological advances happening during this time. It's a time of great wealth in China, and essentially they kind of let their guard down. And what was it? They started employing
Bureaucrats.
scholar bureaucrats as military leaders. So
they also reduced the size of their military. The preceding
yeah,
Tang dynasty had a larger military and was more imperialistic.
yeah,
And the Song kind of got away from that. They didn't trust them.
and so you have a lot of political decisions being made there, and ultimately, like I said, this is the last dynasty before the Mongols, and the Yuan dynasty takes hold.
Yeah, I agree. Points of comparison. This is the golden age to China. Pre 1450 is perhaps the Abbasid caliphate was to Arab Muslim society.
At about the same time, actually.
Yeah, it is. It's happening around the same time. The Abbasids may have ruled a little bit longer, but comparable. They're both going to come to an end, in the same 13th century. But also, the Song dynasty helped really solidify Confucianism and Chinese tradition. Chinese traditions of hierarchy and patriarchy were not so much redefined, but probably reaffirmed during the Song dynasty. The advent of foot binding is going to come about during the Song dynasty, and of course, that will persist throughout so many other dynasties that would come after the Song. The Song dynasty was known for great agricultural production, great population increase, tremendous economic developments and technological developments in the way of agricultural production. So China really is in a golden age in a lot of ways in the Song dynasty, albeit temporary, still very prominent. All right, let's move ahead to 67. And this says the start of the Indian Ocean trade pre-1450. Again, if I come back to my vision of the I'm sorry?
It says the start of the Indian trade ocean.
Oh, the trade ocean.
The trade ocean.
Gotcha, not the ocean trade. Oh,
no, not to be confused with the other.
Yeah.
Hey, I just copied from the list.
My vision in my head about the the Vegas Strip of all the
trade routes.
Trade routes. This is the second one, glaring in the back. You got the Silk Road right up front. Maybe that's the what is it? The Bellagio, right?
Yeah.
And then right behind it might be the Caesar's Palace. But anyway, the Indian Ocean trade, what a big one. Pre-1450. It's the waterway that really did to Eastern Hemispheric society that the land routes of the Silk Road did to the Eastern Hemispheric society. It involves culture. It involves the exchange of goods, the exchange of technology, especially navigational technology. And just what an amazing historical process. What do you think kids need to know about the Indian Ocean trade?
I mean, it's just like what we talked about the Silk Roads. And you kind of mentioned a few already, but again, I'll go back to religions. I mean, what religion's not being exchanged along the Indian Ocean trade at this point? Islam, a big one, especially, in period one, huge religion being spread. This is exchange that still goes on today. So this is unlike the Silk Roads, which kind of dies out. This one still remains. I mean, they're still trading throughout the Indian Ocean complex. So a very durable trade route. Understanding the monsoon winds is going to allow this exchange to happen more frequently. Like you said, the navigational instruments. But I mean, Indian Ocean trade, this might be the creme de la creme. This might be the most important routes of all time.
Caskey?
I think as we said before, I can't see now. Oh, well. I think like we said before, there's so many long-term lasting effects of this with the trade of not just goods, but also the spread of Islam and the spread of diseases, and how this is going to lead to the need or the desire for more and more goods. I think that we see so many advancements here in technology that's going to lead to more widespread trade, and then ultimately, like, they want to get there faster. They want to get these goods faster. They want, and of course, as we move closer towards that magical 1492, that all kind of starts here, and this is that desire that need for all of those goods.
Coach Clutter's calling me. I'll be right back.
Yeah, I just put him to voicemail.
I'll see what he wants real quick. Go
All
on
right.
without me.
All right, good job on the start of the Indian Ocean trade. Let's keep moving here. And we're on to 68, which is the Taj Mahal. And the Taj Mahal was built between 1450 and 1750. The Taj Mahal was one of our pieces of architecture from the Mughal Empire, and it serves as both a resting place, a mausoleum for some Mughal royalty, as well as a mosque. And there in the northern part of India, where the Mughal dynasty's Islamic and governmental headquarters was, you still have this beautiful, highly traveled, highly visited, highly functioning Islamic piece of architecture that's there. And, I taught a lot of these land-based empires in this time period that art and architecture and religion were all utilized to showcase the wealth and the greatness of the emperors, as well as to show off, their really to legitimize their rule. And the Taj Mahal probably, I don't know if there's maybe the Forbidden City in Beijing, maybe the Hagia Sophia as it was converted to a mosque in Istanbul when the Turks moved in. I don't know that there's really a better example of a piece of architecture in world history from this time period that really did those things than the Taj Mahal. What do you guys think?
It's probably arguably one of the most famous piece of architecture in the world. I don't know. It's interesting about the building. A monument to love, to his dead wife. But as we've kind of discussed before, is it really? Is it really? I think it is the most grand gesture of self-idolatry ever. You can say it's a monument to love.
In a religion that wasn't supposed to have idolatry.
Yeah. This guy is the quintessential stereotype of grandiose. He really is. He's so self-centered. And I don't know. I think the Taj Mahal, while we can kind of nitpick him, it does represent a time period of, I think, kind of peace in this time period. It represents more than just architecture and technological advancements. It's the go-to, right? Tim's the AP art guy.
Yeah. Okay. So the way I like to teach this is a great example of the melding together, the syncretism that is happening around the world at that time. You see elements of Islamic architecture in the Taj Mahal. You see elements of Hindu architecture. So I like to use this as an example of cultural diffusion, not diffusion. Anyway, so we see this cultural diffusion that is occurring here.
Only idiots would say diffusion.
Absolutely. So that's kind of the way I use the Taj Mahal. This is an example, as you guys said, architecture. Yeah, like you said, it's really supposed to honor his late wife. No, this is all about him, right? It's really designed, and rulers will use this a lot. They'll use architecture and this grandiose architecture to further their own agenda, to show everyone how powerful they are. And we talked about Louis XIV doing that with the Palace of Versailles.
Oh, they all did it. They all did it.
They all did it.
Peter the Great with the Winter Palace.
They all did it.
The Ming Dynasty with the Forbidden City.
Right.
Justinian and the Byzantine Empire with the Hagia Sophia. They all did it.
Multiple 500 years, but it worked, right? 500 years later, and we're still talking about him.
The White House, whatever. We all do it. We all see it in a way very similarly.
Mr. Millett's baseball card collection.
My baseball card collection, which you all haven't seen. You can see some of the sports heroes I have behind me there. That's Larry Bird there.
They don't know who that is.
Back there, yeah, they might not know who that is. And then I've got Kobe and LeBron
They know who that is. They are.
There, and these are all autographed, by the way. So don't look at my address and break in and come steal my stuff.
Totally come in stealing your stuff.
No, I'm sure you will.
That's always my running joke with kids. I'm like, I don't have to worry about anybody robbing my house. And once they learn that I'm a teacher, they know I got nothing to steal.
Unless they're a sports enthusiast, or they like history books. I can show the kids that. Check this out.
I got a lot of kids' toys if they want that.
Y'all think I got a lot of books in my classroom? I can't even begin. I don't even know if I maneuver this, but that's just one. There's another bookshelf there. It's a smaller one. Anyway, I got too many history books. I haven't even read them all. I feel bad. I feel like I've never either got to them or I started reading them and then something else piqued my interest. But, I don't know. Maybe Topps released their new year of baseball cards or something. All right, are we good on the Taj Mahal, folks?
Yeah.
Let's do it. Onward. Hey, the Tang Dynasty. You say Tang, I say Tong.
Tang.
And,
to the moon
is number 69. About to sneeze. It didn't come out.
Into your elbow.
In your elbow. Come on.
It didn't come out. There's nothing to sneeze into my elbow. It didn't come out. I bet it comes out while I talk. All right, so the Tang Dynasty. Pre-1450. This dynasty actually predated and was the preceding dynasty of the Song Dynasty. And the Tang Dynasty did have a bit of its own golden age to it, if you will. It might not have had the economic and really the productive capacity that the Song Dynasty had. But I will say this about the Tang Dynasty is it was imperialistically, right, in terms of the size, the physical size of its empire, the Tang Dynasty really expanded China to a pretty large extent. Tibet under rule of the Tang Dynasty. It would actually border the expansive Abbasid Caliphate there in the Middle East. In fact, they actually went to war with each other, and that's how Chinese paper would actually be exchanged through some of the Chinese captives there in parts of Central Asia. At any rate, the Tang Dynasty was really kind of militarily speaking, a golden age and a strong period of reign for China. What do you guys think? What should kids really know about this? I mean, are they going to be tested on the Tang Dynasty?
Yeah, I don't think they'll be tested on it, but they should know, like you said, this is what's going to precede the Song Dynasty. So this is the dynasty that's really, like you said, going to expand. They're going to bring back a lot of the traditions that the Han Dynasty had established before this. The Confucian civil service exams. We're going to see the introduction of Buddhism during this time, but also we'll see Confucianism really reestablished. Neo-Confucianism is established also during this time, but Confucianism. This is
also when the gunpowder is going to be invented.
Gunpowder is being invented at this time. So a lot of great inventions. I wouldn't worry too much about this. This is, like I said, they expand this empire really, really, really large. It's pretty big. I don't know.
Yeah, this is also, I think, in a lot of ways, a lot of other East Asian societies are going to be influenced by China during the reign of the Tang Dynasty. A lot of influences on Japanese culture, a lot of influence on Korean culture, a lot of influence on Vietnamese culture is going to happen during this time. And I also think, that as much as you have, like China isn't the only place that is diffusing its culture to nearby places. Obviously, the Abbasids and the Islamic culture is doing this, but China is also doing this, and it's seemingly coming behind a forcefulness or a bit of a powerful military existence of the Tang Dynasty. Not all cultures did that or had to utilize some sort of military or political push for their culture to be diffused. I look at, like Indian culture, for example. Indian empires didn't really venture out too far past South Asia, yet their culture influenced Southeast Asia religiously, linguistically, economically, and all of those ways. The Tang Dynasty had a little bit more of an oomph, a push behind it, a political and military motive behind it. So yeah, very comparable to a lot of our other pre-1450 civilizations at the time. Okay, we good on this?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Number 70, the Crusades. Wow, what a best of times, worst of times sort of set of events in the Crusades. A lot of kids think that when religions meet each other and come into contact with each other, that it's always going to be militant, and it's always going to be vicious, and it's always going to be conflicting. And even though the Crusades were certainly religiously motivated conflicts, even in the conflict, I feel like we can see the greater exchange of ideas, the greater exchange of goods, the greater exchange between combative cultures and combative religions, as we would with Muslims and Christians of the time. The Crusades, and where do we begin? I'll let you guys kind of talk about what you think kids need to know about the Crusades, and we'll try to put it into context here.
Well, I mean, I think you kind of nailed it. I think what they need to know is not necessarily why the Crusades started, but they need to kind of know the effects of the Crusades. The Crusades are going to force these Europeans out of Europe. I mean, this is something. I mean, Europeans, they're really lacking in interactions with the rest of the world. I don't want to say they weren't interacting at all, because they were, but not as much, for sure. And this is gonna this is going to destroy the essentially, or be the first step towards destroying this feudal system. But these knights needed something to do. This gave them something to do. They travel over not once, not twice, but what was it? 9 different crusades, 10 if you include the Children's Crusade.
Multitudes, yeah.
Yeah, and most of them failed, in retaking the Holy Land. But what we do see though is Europe kind of opens their eyes to the rest of the world for the first time in a long time. They realize, whoa. There's a lot of intellectual knowledge we don't know about that we need to get our hands on over there in the Middle East. They have technologies that we don't have. So this kind of
when you lose so many Crusader campaigns, you tend to start to ask, well, why are we so behind? Why can't we beat these Turks? Why can't we beat them?
Yeah, so if you combine the Crusades with your Adventures of Marco Polo and your journals of Ibn Battuta, I mean, these 3 things are kind of creating this desire by Europeans to realize, okay, we need to be able to compete in the rest of the world because we've fallen behind. And so I think you kind of throw those 3 things together. I mean, these are real big motivations for Europe. And I think the Crusades are a definite example of this.
One thing I teach too is, what if the Christians won all the Crusades? Would we have seen, Columbus and da Gama traveling across oceans around Africa to gain direct access? Had Christians won these Crusades, they may have just sailed through the Mediterranean and Black Sea and took what they wanted.
Oh yeah,
they just marched on to Southwest Asia and the Middle East, but the fact that they didn't forced them to, literally there were people with money and power and wealth and military. There were royal family members and kings and queens that said, you know what, it's going to be better and safer and probably more successful, rather than to go and try and go through the Turks again and die on battlefields against the Turks, to cross an ocean that we don't know anything about, or to go around the African continent through an ocean and into another ocean that we have never traveled through before. Like the unknown and the uncertainty of their ignorance of the oceans, they had more trust in than the knowing and experience that they had that they were going to lose to the Turks again. So, with the Crusades ending the way they did, it did create more curiosity, more desire for Europeans to catch up. It exposed a relative military and technological inferiority that they had. a little bit of self-identity. Well, maybe we really are in a dark age here. Maybe we could be better than we are, and maybe the Crusades help that mindset along. It's hard to go up from up, but it's easy to go up from rock bottom, and maybe losing the Crusades could have been that. Caskey, did you want to chime in on this, or are we?
I think you guys did a good job saying that this is more than just a religious thing. A lot of times people think, oh, Crusades, freeing the Holy Land, and it is so much more than that. And really, I think that you could make an argument that it was more economic than religious.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
Yeah, well, you're gonna have a lot of Europeans start settling in like Italy. That's a big reason why the Renaissance began in Italy, because a lot of these you're gonna create like all kinds of merchants and guilds and businesses are gonna sprout up in Italy as a result of the Crusades. Because a lot of these Crusaders left to say, "Hey, I'm gonna go fight these Crusades."
Some of them didn't even make it there.
They marched through Italy, and they're like, "Oh man, we could actually maybe make some money here. I'm never going back to England or the Holy Roman Empire or France,
Yeah.
So, I mean, you kind of have that too.
Yeah, no, good stuff. And I think the element of religion, it took wealthy people of privilege and elite, political and military leaders to see, hey, there's some economic gain that can be come from this if we carve out some small states in the Holy Land and in Southwest Asia. But how are we going to get hundreds of thousands of people to actually go and fight these things so that we can have these things? You're not going to convince them from economics. You're not going to convince them from that. You're going to convince them through religion.
Especially
you're
at
going
that
to propagate religion to them. That's how you get the Third Crusade to be the most international of the Crusades in terms of the soldiers. That's how you get them. You play to the things that matter to the people of Europe at the time. Religion was going to get them to move. That wasn't maybe necessarily everybody's motive, was the economic standpoint. But if you're trying to get the ordinary people behind this movement, religion was the way to mobilize, for sure.
All right.
All right. Onward, 71, the Tokugawa shogunate established. And of course, this is in Japan, happening 1450 to 1750. I'm going to take off on this one for a sec. I look at that year 1600 is the one that sticks in my mind, because that's when Tokugawa Ieyasu, the leader of that Tokugawa state in Japan, puts to rest a long period of civil war among the Japanese daimyo noble families in their respective states. And in doing this, created a political and militant dominance over the formerly warring Japanese states. Great comparison. I know I spoke on this a little bit in one of my older podcasts, because it's not really part of the curriculum now. But what a great comparison to this with the rise of the Qin dynasty and the Qin state in China in earlier times, with the period of warring states, more than 2 centuries of civil war that China endured. The Tokugawa did a lot of the similar things in bringing control and stability and unity to the divisive Japanese political landscape. You want to talk about a place that really centralized political authority and really unified its talk about, yesterday you talked about Louis XIV struggling with the nobility. The Tokugawa shogunate didn't struggle as much in controlling the daimyo and the wealthy landowning families in Japan, because of the successful political systems they put into place. What do you guys think kids need to know about the Tokugawa shogunate?
Well, one of the comparisons that I like to make, though, to Louis is, we talked about how Louis had this Palace of Versailles, this huge, palace built so that he could entertain the nobility, so he could control them more. Tokugawa did the same thing, in essence, with the alternate attendants, where he would force the daimyo to come to his palace.
Stay for a year.
Stay for an entire year, right? And it's that little bit of control that he knows. If he can control the daimyo, control these lords, noblemen essentially, right? That he can then, start centralizing and doing things that he wants to do. So I think there's a good comparison there. But Tokugawa shogunate is essentially this movement away from feudal Japan, where Japan is in the hands of a bunch of daimyo and lords, to now you have it much more highly centralized. It's the move from a decentralized society to a highly centralized society under the shogunate. So that's kind of the big thing that I feel like kids need to know.
Caskey. Yeah, the only other thing I would say too is, as much as they are unifying and centralizing and ending feudal Japan, is they are also responsible for the isolation of Japan from the rest of the world. It's the Tokugawa shogunate that is going to enact its policies of isolation, restricting trade and restricting cultural influences, and they're doing this in the time that Western European countries are on the rise and are on the move and are showing up and gaining more direct access to the Far East than ever before, and they're able to kind of keep them at arm's length. We mentioned that in an earlier thing that we reviewed. So these are the guys that are doing that. The Tokugawa shogunate will stay in power actually beyond 1750. Will stay in power until the 1860s, when the Meiji restoration takes place. All right, onward to 72. Voodoo, established in Haiti, and this is period 2, 1450 to 1750. One of the things that is a beautiful element of world history is the cultural and religious syncretism. We see this in so many parts of the world, and you almost have to look in high and low and in small places to find it sometimes. But, you see like the blending of religions in India with Islamic and Hindu and even Buddhist influences. You'll see it with, Christian and Buddhist influences in parts of Central Asia. You'll see syncretism of religion and ideological foundations in China and Japan and Tibet and places like this. This one is one of the examples of that on our side of the world here in the Western Hemisphere, with voodoo being established in Haiti. What do you guys think? What do kids need to understand about religious syncretism, and how does voodoo play into that?
Well, in this case, you have African slaves that are being brought from Africa to the Americas throughout this time period. And when they arrive in the New World, in many cases, these slaves are being forced, or many slaves realize it's in their best interest, to convert to Christianity.
Especially in the French colony.
Right, especially in the French colonies. Yeah. And so, a lot of them, they didn't want to just throw away their old traditions, their animistic native beliefs. And so what they did is we see this kind of blending of the two, right? This syncretism, as Mr. Millett just said. And so that, in as far as voodoo goes, that's kind of, what we're seeing. It's due to the slave trade that has been established. We see the establishment of voodoo.
Yeah, it truly is a product of, the transatlantic world and the Atlantic world. In that, it's an effect from the transatlantic African slave trade, and I feel like it really emerged out of a context of oppression. As a way for people of African descent living in French Saint-Domingue to express themselves religiously. And that is a big part of this. Other places that came under direct Christian rule attempted to do things like this, and perhaps in Haiti, this was a pretty exemplary element here. Caskey, did you want to chime in on this one?
The last thing I would say on voodoo here in Haiti is this is a great example of where we can see the uniqueness of how religion influences societies and how different it can be implemented in society. So we have religious freedom in many countries around the world, and they have a religious freedom there. But in our country, for example, we have separation of church and state. And in places like in the Middle East, they don't have that, where their religion is their government and their government is their religion. And here's kind of an example of that in Haiti as well, where voodoo and hoodoo are more than just a religion to these people. It is everything to them in their lives, and it is embedded in everything of their lives and in their daily lives and in their language and in their the way that they have the rituals. And it's a lot more than just a religion to them that you go, on Wednesday nights or Saturday or Sunday or something. It's incorporated, embedded a lot more in their society than it is, say, a religion like Christianity or Islam is in the United States.
Sure.
So I think the uniqueness of that is a great example of where you could do a compare contrast of the significance of religion in a society in this time period or any other modern time periods.
Sure. Yes. Other syncretic blends, kids might be wondering, of religions, voodoo being one of them, Sikhism to an extent would be another one. Zen Buddhism and Chan Buddhism could be examples of it.
Neo-Confucianism.
Neo-Confucianism in China. Yeah, I mean, these would all be examples of that. We used to teach one when we taught the old course. Manichism was a big one. That included, Christian, Buddhist, Jewish, Zoroastrian influences there in Central Asia and what is today Iran, and some of the old Persian imperial lands. But at any rate, these syncretic religious blends are kind of the essence of the cultural exchange that world history tries to emphasize. All right, 73, we're almost there, folks. Women's rights movement begins 1750 to 1900, and quite frankly, this is going to be maybe a bit more isolated to Western and westernized societies. I look at women's rights as a movement that is really going to begin with the Industrial Revolution. I don't know that there is really anything more happening in that time period that is really starting to alter women's roles in society and the expectations on women, and especially working class women, because for a lot of working class women, the Industrial Revolution with the movement to factory systems got them out of the homes, got them breaking out of that cult of domesticity, when they would now spend more hours in a workplace rather than in a home. To me, that was a bit liberating for them, for good or for bad, since it had to do with work. But man, this changes the dynamics of women in the home when they are now out of the home for a great portion of their day because they're working. Perhaps when they came home, maybe the old patriarchal system was restarted at home when the door shut behind them, but they're bringing home a wage. They're bringing, themselves are out of the house for a long period of time. That's going to change the dynamics of the relationships between women and their husbands, and women and their fathers, and women and their sons, as it pertains to home life when this happens. I think that starts with opportunity for women to get out of the home and be employed, and it's going to eventually spread to opportunities in education and opportunities in academia and intellectual fields. It will begin to escalate with democratization and with that mass politics in Europe and in the United States, where women will start to be represented by socialistic parties because they are part of the workforce. And then when socialists didn't do enough for their female counterparts, you begin to see the feminist movement take off, and every little right or privilege that women were securing in a time before they were even allowed to vote in democratic societies, in the way of property rights and owning businesses and divorce and marriage rights and things like this. These are starting to come about due to the changing nature of gender roles and society as societies were moving toward a more industrialized model. What do you guys think? Anything that you want to add to that?
I'm going to go back even further than you. I'm going to go back to the Enlightenment.
Sure.
I think within this Enlightenment movement, women start thinking, they start applying Enlightenment ideas, equality for everyone, all this stuff. They're going to apply
Well, yeah,
that
because a lot of your Enlightenment thinkers, the males, they weren't even inclusive of women. They were dismissive of women.
very much so.
Talk about equality, but then say, oh, except 51% of the population.
Yeah, and then you fast forward to the French Revolution, and I mean the revolution is in many ways dictated by women.
Women take action.
Right, women taking action. I think you can even go back further than that. Before industry even really becomes a big thing.
Sure.
They're going to use these Enlightenment principles to guide their way through trying to grant more rights. In the late 1800s, we had the Seneca Falls Convention in America and in New York, and
they rewrite the Declaration of Independence, much like Olympe de Gouges rewrote the Declaration of the Rights of Woman.
Yep.
They rewrite this in a way to say these things were not applied to us when they were first drafted, and they should be.
Yeah, and this is all happening in the 1800s. This is all happening years before they're even given suffrage. So I like to use the Enlightenment as a way to show that, hey, they're going to use Enlightenment ideas to gain a footing in regards to political rights.
Yeah, I think a criticism of the Enlightenment was some of the limitations to the male Enlightenment thinkers when it came to women's rights and when it came to slavery. Those were two things that the Enlightenment, I don't know, like as intelligent as it was, they just seemed to be so dismissive to those two groups of people, and women of the time that were becoming, more intellectually, having more intellectual and academic opportunities. They used the Enlightenment kind of against those limitations. A lot of your women got involved in even the abolitionist movement as well, because they recognized the unjust and immoral aspects there. They get involved later on in other causes. They were big in anti-war movements, big in anti-alcohol, and movements like that. Women having felt oppression in public and private lives tended to empathize with the other groups that may have felt similar forms of oppression. So, Caskey, did you want to add to this?
Real quick, couple of names. Make sure that maybe you could throw out Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony. Good names to throw in an essay. And
Mary Wollstonecraft.
Yeah, Wollstonecraft. Mother Mary Shelley. And the last thing is that when you're looking at the Americas as kind of the front runner of this in period 3 is property rights are huge and women are limited on that. And so we have to think about manifest destiny as well, where a lot of these women are traveling out west with their families and their husbands die. Their husbands are kidnapped by Native Americans. Their husbands leave them. There's a multitude of things that happen to them. And these women have to pick up, on their own and have to take care of their families and take care of ranches and farms. And they start building their own businesses. And in California, we start to see, the rise of women in businesses. The first millionaire in California is a woman. And you start to see them progress over this time and start to gain. And so I think that's something as well that you could mention and talk about.
Yeah. All right. Good stuff. Let's move on. We got 2 left. 74, the Yuan dynasty. And that's going to be pre-1450 to 1750. This got a name drop earlier, as you talked about it, Mr. Ferrell, displacing the Song dynasty. The Yuan dynasty, main thing to be able to identify it, is that this is the Mongolian dynasty in China. And, the Yuan dynasty is going to be, I suppose the power structure that is going to enable the Mongols to treat the Chinese as they would. And I was just thinking about this too, is that the way the Yuan dynasty, a foreign and Mongolian dynasty in China, treated the Chinese citizens there, or the subjects, I should say, was not quite the same as they treated their subjects in other parts of the Mongolian kingdoms. But what do you think? What are some things that our students need to know about the Yuan dynasty before 1450?
Yeah, I mean, this is essentially Chinese dynasty, like you said, during Mongol occupation. The Mongols did not look highly upon the Chinese. In many ways, they tried
And vice
to,
versa, really.
vice versa. Yeah, I know the Mongols forbade the Chinese from marrying a Mongol. They forbade them, to even speak their own language. They did away with the civil service exam. They did away with a lot of pre-existing cultural elements. So I kind of wanted to add in that. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have there.
Do you want to chime in on that? Yeah, the Yuan dynasty, just some elements to think about with this. They settled the city of Khan Balik, which was the city of the great Khan and is today known as Beijing. So that was the capital city there. It was founded by Kublai Khan, one of the grandsons of Genghis Khan. This, as much as Kublai Khan and the Yuan dynasty did not trust a lot of Chinese and Confucian scholars in their government, it's interesting that he was actually more trustworthy of Italians, Venetians, that had traveled, as far as China, allowing for Marco Polo to live there for about 20 years. And so the reason why we know so much about the Mongols in Europe before 1450 was because of this. A lot of times they say that, Chinese historians, they look at the Yuan dynasty and the Mongolian period as a dark age in China because it foreign rule. It ended the Song dynasty. It was, a hindrance for Chinese cultural expression. But, there again, there are some silver lining here. The Yuan dynasty did help improve some of the infrastructure in China, did reestablish economic prosperity in China through, their control of the eastern portion and the eastern terminus of the Silk Road. There is a bit of a silver lining there. I think probably the most devastating thing that the Yuan dynasty was in power for.
My dogs are going to start going nuts and stuff because the guys are here mowing the lawn. So do you want me to drop off or do you want to finish this quick?
It doesn't matter, whatever you want to do.
My dogs are going to go nuts because the guys are here mowing the lawn. So.
All right, we'll be done.
You don't mow your own grass, Caskey?
No.
No, it must be nice. Just
how big is your yard?
Anything.
Pretty big.
No, I thought there was a man living at your house.
I live at my house. I'm a man.
Oh. You just need another man to do the lawn.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, because I don't want to waste my money on a lawnmower.
Okay. At any rate, the Yuan dynasty. Probably the worst thing that came about for the Chinese was the outbreak of plague. Happens in the 1300s. And that'll actually, in many ways, lead to the Yuan dynasty's downfall. And, of course, then the Ming dynasty will come into power after that. So 75. Do y'all know what 75 is? I remember.
It starts with a Z.
It starts with a Z, and it's deals with China.
Zen Buddhism. Zhao Zhanghe.
Zhanghe travels across the Indian Ocean. Speaking of the Ming dynasty, Zhanghe. All right, Ferrell, take it away. What do you know about Zhanghe and what do kids need to know about him?
All right, the first thing my students will probably tell you is he was a eunuch. Which meant,
of all the things that you're going to bring up, that's the one thing that your kids have to know.
That's how they remember him.
That he was a eunuch.
Okay.
Go ahead. So you might want to explain what a eunuch is for all of us, baby.
Basically, he did not have certain male parts that most males have. And anyways, Now, and in Chinese culture, of course, eunuchs were chosen because they could the emperors could trust these guys. These were your most trusted people, were your eunuchs. A lot of times they couldn't trust other scholar gentry. They couldn't they didn't trust them.
Yeah, really, becoming a eunuch was kind of the shortcut to getting in good graces with the government.
Exactly. I shortcut. Yeah, it's good. Anyways, but yeah, so
I mean, those Confucian scholars spent years in school and they still couldn't get into the good graces.
True.
And you just take the shortcut and you got it.
Snip, snip. So
Actually, more of a shortcut is really what it was.
yeah, much more of a snip. So Zheng He was a really a trusted advisor to the king, to the emperor. And so essentially, this was a chance for the Chinese to really reestablish themselves after the Yuan dynasty.
Now, what's the dynasty that Zheng He sailed for? Did you mention that yet? The dynasty he sailed for?
Yeah, the Ming.
The Ming, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and so the Ming dynasty, their whole thing about the Ming is reestablish Chinese greatness, make China great again, right?
And with his red hat.
Well, they put my it would be MCGA.
Mikaga.
Anyways, but so Zheng He, he wants, his goal is to go, and this is kind of a diplomatic mission to establish, a relationship with peoples far away, and also though to remind them that hey, China, we're back and we're stronger than ever before. And so he's going to travel. He's going to use the Indian Ocean routes. He's going to make it as far as at the African coastline. Not America, Gavin Menzies. He does not go to America.
Although there is that theory that's out there that he actually discovered America 71 years before Columbus.
Yeah. Okay, Boomer.
There's one book that says that, and it's been debunked.
I don't believe it, but it is out there.
Yeah. Anyways,
one book.
So he's going to basically introduce China to peoples as far away as India, Southwest Asia, and East Africa. And
let me ask you guys this: since Zheng He had large ships, great technology, great funding.
Zheng He came out with ships.
Why are we not talking about like Chinese colonization and the Chinese coming to power and rising to power after 1450? Does the Ming Dynasty start? Like what happens with this?
They didn't support colonization. They actually shut this down pretty quickly, within a matter of 15 years or something like that.
Yeah, I think he went on 7 voyages, and then they brought him back and said, "You're not traveling anymore."
Yeah, they basically didn't think it was profitable. You have a very conservative Ming government that didn't think that these voyages could have been profitable. They didn't feel like there was anything out there that they really wanted. I mean, this was kind of that Chinese idea of they're the middle kingdom in the world. Everybody revolves around them, and everybody relies on Chinese goods. So they didn't feel like there were goods outside of China that it was worthwhile. They didn't feel like they needed to set up markets overseas like the Europeans are going to do.
And once they had established their diplomatic relationships through his voyages,
what need is there?
Why do you need to keep going?
Right, and that was the idea.
That's one of the key things after 1450 is the Chinese, the Europeans. Their royal families are funding European exploratory oceanic voyages. But by 1450, the Ming had stopped doing that. They seemed to be more focused on themselves, on their own isolation, on their own infrastructure, on the wall, on the Forbidden City. They're fearful of another insurrection or invasion by the Mongols, and this really changes the progression of world history. A beautiful what if? What if they don't stop funding Zheng He?
Yeah.
What if they didn't stop doing these things? What's the likelihood that the Chinese could have gained direct access to Europe had they actually been motivated to do so? Because I am of the belief that they very well could have gone to America. They had the technology and the enabling factors to be able to do it. They just didn't have the motivation to continue to do it.
Yeah, the ships that he was arriving on, these were 10 times the size of Columbus's ships.
Yeah, I could
I mean,
put
these
the
were much
the
larger.
Pinta and the Santa Maria on the poop deck of one
Yeah,
of one of Zheng He's fleets here, or one
Yeah.
of his treasure ships.
yeah. Okay,
So,
all right.
good stuff on Zheng He. Caskey, any parting shots on Zheng He?
No, I don't know what Tim ranted on for 20 minutes, so I'll just let it be. I'm sure it's good.
He mainly talked about the fact that he was a eunuch.
Oh,
So
He seemed to have some. He
all you
seemed to
need
have
to
some
know.
affinity for this. I don't know why.
we talked about how to be a eunuch, you could all you had, it was kind of the shortcut way.
Oh. Your dad jokes are the worst.
No, Millette said that.
Oh.
Now it's awesome, right?
Now it's awesome. That's the best dad joke I ever heard.
I hate you, Caskey.
All right. Well, this concludes our video review. We will come back with more review videos. It won't be as lengthy as this. It will probably be a little more structured. Hopefully, this took a while on our part, but please utilize our efforts in your efforts. Don't let this video go on deaf ears and blind eyes. Click on it. Share it with your friends that are taking AP World History. Share it with your friends that really want to do well on this exam, as different as it's going to be. But
Give us likes if you want us to do some more collab videos.
Yeah, do that, and we will do that. All right. Well, I tell you what, I'm going to stop the share.
And we're finished.
Come back to this, and I will stop the recording in 3, 2,